I wasn't expecting him to walk in, let alone catch me like that. But the moment our eyes met, something shifted. And there was no going back. My name is Sophia. I'm 45, a creative director at a boutique interior design firm that caters to high-end clients. My job is demanding but rewarding, giving me a sense of purpose I don't always feel at home. My husband David is 50 and a successful attorney. He works long hours, often traveling for cases, and when he's home, he's distant, always tired or distracted by his phone or laptop. We've been married for nearly 10 years, and while it started out as a whirlwind romance, the spark fizzled out long ago. I don't blame him entirely. Life has a way of dulling even the brightest flames, especially when two people stop trying. This summer, Ryan, David's son from his first marriage, moved back in with us. He's 23, fresh out of college, and taking some time to figure out his next steps. When David suggested Ryan stay with us to save money, I didn't think much of it. In fact, I barely knew him. He'd spent most of his teenage years with his mother, visiting us only on holidays. But when he walked through the door with his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, I barely recognized him. The awkward teenager I remembered had grown into a confident young man, tall, fit, with an easy smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was charming in a way that felt effortless, and while I tried not to notice, it was impossible not to. The day it all started was just like any other. David was at work, as usual, and I had come home early after a long meeting. I was changing out of my work clothes in the bedroom, thinking I had the house to myself. The door wasn't locked, I hadn't even thought to lock it, and just as I pulled my blouse over my head, the door swung open. Ryan stood there, frozen in the doorway, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of me. "Oh, sorry," he stammered, quickly turning his back. I grabbed the first thing I could find to cover myself, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's fine. I thought you were out," I managed to say, trying to sound casual, despite the heat rushing to my face. He mumbled an apology and disappeared down the hallway, leaving the door ajar. For a moment I just stood there, clutching the fabric to my chest, replaying the look on his face. It wasn't just shock I saw in his eyes. It was something else, something that sent a shiver down my spine. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About him. About the way he looked at me. And for the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me. Something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. After Ryan walked in on me that day, I tried to convince myself it was just an awkward moment. An innocent mistake that we'd both move past. But something about it lingered. Every time I replayed the scene in my mind, I remembered the way his eyes had widened, the brief moment before he turned away, the flush of his face. For the first day or two I avoided him. Not intentionally, but I found myself keeping busy, working longer hours, taking calls in my office, or retreating to the bedroom early. It wasn't that I thought he'd bring it up. Ryan didn't strike me as the confrontational type. But I couldn't shake the feeling of how exposed I'd felt, how vulnerable. And yet, there was another part of me, a quiet, insistent voice, that felt something else entirely. The thrill of being seen. A few days later, the tension between us broke through in the smallest of ways. It was late in the afternoon, and I was in the kitchen making iced tea. David had called to let me know he'd be late, as usual, and Ryan had just gotten back from the gym. I heard him before I saw him. The heavy thud of his sneakers on the hardwood floor. He walked into the kitchen shirtless, a towel slung around his neck, his hair damp with sweat. I glanced up from the counter and immediately regretted it. His broad shoulders and defined chest were impossible to ignore. "Hey," he said casually, grabbing a glass from the cabinet. "That smells good." "Iced tea?" I replied, focusing intently on pouring it into the pitcher. "Mind if I have some?" "Sure," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I handed him a glass. He stood close, too close, as he poured himself a drink. I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, the faint scent of cologne and sweat lingering in the air. "About the other day," he started, his tone cautious. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced up at him, my fingers tightening around the counter's edge. "Ryan, it's fine. Really. I didn't mean to walk in like that," he said, his eyes searching mine. "I wasn't thinking." "It was an accident," I said quickly, hoping to put the conversation to rest. But he didn't move. He just stood there, his gaze lingering on me in a way that made my stomach flip. "You look really nice that day, by the way," he said softly, almost as an afterthought. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. "Ryan? I'm sorry," he said, shaking his head and stepping back. "I shouldn't have said that." He turned and walked out of the kitchen before I could say another word, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding in my chest. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. The way he'd said it, soft, almost reverent, like it wasn't just an apology, but a confession. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind racing. The next morning, things felt almost normal again. Ryan was back to his easygoing self, cracking jokes at breakfast and acting as if nothing had happened. But I felt it, the subtle shift in the air between us, the stolen glances, the way his hand brushed mine when he passed me the sugar, the faint smile that lingered on his lips when he thought I wasn't looking. I told myself it was nothing, just a product of my overactive imagination. But that changed one quiet evening when David was working late again. I was curled up on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, half watching a romantic drama on TV. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. I thought I was alone until Ryan walked in. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, motioning to the other end of the couch. "Of course not," I said, my voice betraying the nervous flutter in my chest. He sat down, his presence immediately filling the room. For a while, we watched the movie in silence, the only sound the occasional clink of my glass on the coffee table. "What's this about?" he asked, gesturing to the screen. "Just a love story," I said with a shrug. "Nothing special." "Looks intense," he said, leaning back and stretching his arm along the back of the couch. His hand was close, so close, I could feel the warmth of it against my shoulder. I nodded, pretending to focus on the screen, but I was acutely aware of every movement he made. The way his knee brushed against mine when he shifted. The way his breath hitched slightly when he glanced at me out of the corner of his eye. And then it happened. I don't know who moved first, if it was him or me, but suddenly, our faces were inches apart. My heart raced as his eyes locked onto mine, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. "Sophia?" he whispered, his voice low and filled with something I couldn't quite place. I should have stopped him. I should have pulled away. But instead, I leaned in, closing the distance between us. His lips were soft and warm, and the kiss was slow, tentative, like we were both testing the waters of something forbidden. My hands trembled as they found their way to his shoulders, and his fingers brushed against my jaw, sending shivers down my spine. The kiss deepened, and for a moment I let myself get lost in it. In him. In the way he made me feel, alive, wanted, desired in a way I hadn't felt in years. But then reality came crashing down around me, and I pulled away, my chest heaving as I struggled to catch my breath. We can't," I whispered, my voice shaky. "I know," he said, his forehead resting against mine, "but I don't want to stop." Neither did I. After that kiss, everything changed. It wasn't a declaration, it wasn't a decision, but something unspoken had shifted between us. Ryan and I didn't talk about it the next day, or the day after that, but the tension lingered in every glance, every word, every room we happened to share. I tried to convince myself it was just one impulsive moment, a mistake that we could both quietly forget. But the truth was, I didn't want to forget it. I didn't want to stop feeling the way I had when his lips met mine, when his touch made me come alive again. The first real test came one afternoon, a few days later. I had taken the day off work to catch up on some errands, and when I got back to the house, I found Ryan in the kitchen. He was standing by the stove, flipping through a recipe book, with the faint sound of music playing from his phone. "Cooking something?" I asked, setting my keys down on the counter. "Trying to," he said with a grin, holding up a bowl of chopped vegetables. "Thought I'd surprise you and Dad with dinner tonight. Figured it's the least I can do since I'm living here rent-free." "That's sweet," I said, smiling despite the way my heart skipped a beat. He turned back to the stove, stirring something in a pan, and I couldn't help but notice how at ease he seemed, how natural it felt to see him there, as if he belonged. "Want a taste?" he asked, holding out a spoon. I stepped closer, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened as I leaned in. The spoon hovered in front of my lips, and when I tasted the food, I was surprised by how good it was. "Not bad," I said, licking my lips. Ryan's eyes lingered on me for just a moment too long. Glad you approve, he said, his voice soft. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with something neither of us was willing to name. I stepped back, breaking the spell. Well, let me know if you need any help. I left the kitchen quickly, but my hands were trembling by the time I reached the living room. Over the next week, these moments became more frequent. They weren't planned, but they weren't entirely accidental either. It was the way his hand brushed against mine when he passed me a dish at dinner, or the way he stood just a little too close when we were doing the dishes. It was the way his gaze lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking. And then, one night, we crossed another line. David had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day at the office, and I was sitting on the couch with a book. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner, and I thought I was alone until I heard footsteps on the stairs. Ryan appeared in the doorway, wearing a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt that clung to his chest in a way that made it impossible not to notice. "Can't sleep?" I asked, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "Not really," he said, walking over to the couch. "Mind if I sit?" "Of course not." He sat down beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body. For a while we didn't say anything, and I tried to focus on the book in my hands. But I could feel his eyes on me, the weight of his gaze making my skin tingle. "What are you reading?" he asked, breaking the silence. I held up the book so he could see the cover. "Just a mystery novel. Nothing exciting." "Looks good," he said, leaning in slightly to get a closer look. His arm brushed against mine, and I felt my breath hitch. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly he reached out and took the book from my hands, setting it on the coffee table. "Ryan." I started, but he silenced me with a look. His hand found mine, his fingers warm and steady as they closed around mine. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart pounded in my chest, and I knew I should pull away, but I couldn't. Instead, I let him take my hand, let him draw me closer until our faces were just inches apart. And then he kissed me. This time it wasn't tentative or hesitant. It was deep and urgent, filled with all the things we hadn't said. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I melted into him, my fingers tangling in his hair. We didn't stop until we heard a noise from upstairs, a faint creak that sent a jolt of panic through both of us. "I should go," he said, his voice hushed as he pulled back. I nodded, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. "Good night," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Good night," he said, and then he was gone, leaving me alone on the couch, with my heart racing and my mind spinning. The next day I told myself it had to stop, but as much as I wanted to believe that, I knew it wasn't true. The way Ryan made me feel, the way he looked at me, touched me, it was something I couldn't ignore. The moments between us became bolder after that. One afternoon I was in my office, working on a presentation for an upcoming client meeting. The door was slightly ajar, and I didn't hear him come in until he was standing right behind me. "Working hard?" he asked, his voice low. I jumped, turning to look at him. "You scared me." "Sorry," he said with a grin, leaning against the desk. "Didn't mean to interrupt." "It's fine," I said, closing my laptop. "What's up?" "Just wanted to see you," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Ryan, we can't keep doing this." "Why not?" he asked, stepping closer. "It's not like anyone knows." "That doesn't make it right," I said, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing against my cheek. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Because I didn't want him to stop. It wasn't long before we found ourselves seeking out more moments like that. Small windows of time when we could be alone together, away from the watchful eyes of the world. In the kitchen late at night, when the rest of the house was asleep. In the backyard by the pool, where the warm summer air felt like a cocoon around us. In my office during the middle of the day, when I was supposed to be working. Every time, the line between us blurred a little more, and every time, the risk of being caught only made it more thrilling. The more time Ryan and I spent together, the less control I felt I had. Every passing day, the boundary between us grew thinner until it felt almost invisible. What started as fleeting moments, stolen glances, accidental touches, quickly became intentional. I stopped telling myself it was a mistake. I stopped pretending it was something I could just walk away from. I knew it was wrong, but the way he made me feel, it was intoxicating. For the first time in years, I felt alive again, and I didn't want to let that go no matter the cost. One evening, David was called away unexpectedly for an overnight deposition in another city. The moment he walked out the door, the house felt quieter, the tension sharper. Ryan was in the living room, sprawled out on the couch with a beer in hand. He looked up as I walked in, his eyes tracking my every move. "You look nice," he said, his tone casual, but his gaze anything but. "Thanks," I replied, sitting down in the armchair across from him. I was wearing a simple sundress, something light and comfortable for the warm evening, but the way he looked at me made it feel like I was wearing nothing at all. For a while, we made small talk, the kind of mundane conversation that would seem normal to anyone looking in from the outside. But beneath it, the tension simmered, unspoken but undeniable. At some point, the conversation lulled, and the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the ceiling fan. I glanced at him, and when our eyes met, I knew neither of us was thinking about the weather or the news or anything else we'd been pretending to care about. Without a word, he stood and walked over to me. "Sophia," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked up at him, my breath hitching in my chest. "We shouldn't." He knelt in front of me, his hands resting lightly on my knees. "Tell me to stop," he said, his eyes searching mine. I couldn't. His hands slid up my thighs, slow and deliberate, and before I knew it, he was pulling me to my feet. My heart was racing, every nerve in my body alight with anticipation as he guided me to the couch. That night, we didn't hold back. With David gone and the house to ourselves, we gave in completely, the weight of what we were doing eclipsed by the sheer intensity of it. Every kiss, every touch felt electric, like we were breaking through some invisible barrier that had been holding us back. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside the window. The house was quiet, and for a moment I let myself forget everything: who I was, where I was, what I'd done. But when I turned over and saw Ryan still asleep beside me, reality came crashing back. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and padded into the kitchen. As I stood there, staring out the window with a cup of coffee in my hands, the weight of my actions settled over me. I knew I should feel guilty, and I did. Partially. But more than that, I felt alive. For the first time in years, I felt desired, seen, and understood in a way David hadn't made me feel in a long time. But I also knew this couldn't last. We tried to be careful after that. We tried to limit our encounters to times and places where we wouldn't be caught. But the thrill of it, the constant risk of discovery, only made it more intoxicating. One afternoon, I was working in my home office, the door slightly ajar. I had a conference call in 20 minutes, and I was reviewing some notes when Ryan appeared in the doorway. "Busy?" he asked, his voice low. "Always," I replied, glancing up at him. "What do you need?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped inside and closed the door behind him, the soft click of the latch sending a shiver down my spine. "Ryan?" He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, his hands on my shoulders as he spun my chair to face him. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his tone teasing but firm. "I've been working," I said, my voice trembling. "You work too much," he replied, his fingers trailing down my arms. I should have stopped him. I should have pushed him away. But instead, I let him pull me to my feet, his lips crashing against mine with an urgency that made my head spin. The desk rattled as he lifted me onto it, his hands sliding up my thighs as my papers scattered to the floor. For a moment, I forgot everything: my work, my husband, the life I was supposed to be living. All I could think about was him. Our recklessness nearly cost us everything one evening, just a few weeks later. David had gone out for a late dinner with colleagues, and I thought we'd have the house to ourselves for hours. Ryan and I were in the kitchen, laughing quietly as we shared a bottle of wine. I don't even remember what we were talking about. It didn't matter. At some point, he leaned in, his hand brushing against mine. I looked up at him, and before I knew it, we were kissing, the wine forgotten on the counter as he pressed me against the fridge. Neither of us heard the front door open. "Sophia?" David's voice rang out from the foyer. I pushed Ryan away so quickly I almost stumbled. my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to catch my breath. "In here," I called, my voice strained. Ryan stepped back, his hands shoved in his pockets, his face flushed. David walked into the kitchen a moment later, his brow furrowing as he took in the scene. "What's going on?" he asked, his gaze shifting between us. "Nothing," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "We were just catching up." David didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further. Instead, he grabbed a glass of water and headed upstairs, leaving me alone with Ryan. "That was close," I whispered once David was out of earshot. "Too close," Ryan agreed, his voice low. But even as we stood there, the tension between us unbroken, I knew this wasn't over. The closer we came to being caught, the harder it became to stop. The danger only added fuel to the fire, making every touch, every kiss feel more urgent, more necessary. And yet, deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down around us. I thought I had control of the situation. I told myself I could balance the two worlds, being a wife to David and whatever it was that Ryan and I had become. I told myself I could keep it from spiraling out of control. But the truth was, the more time I spent with Ryan, the harder it became to reconcile what we were doing with the life I'd built. I could feel the walls closing in, the guilt gnawing at me every time David looked at me with even a glimmer of affection. And yet, when I was with Ryan, none of that mattered. One evening, a few days after the close call in the kitchen, I found myself alone in the backyard. The sun had just set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the warm summer air felt heavy against my skin. I had a glass of wine in my hand, the kind of quiet moment I usually cherished. But tonight, my mind was anything but quiet. I didn't hear Ryan come outside until he was right behind me. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. I turned to face him, my heart fluttering at the sight of him. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, his hair slightly messy, and he looked so effortlessly handsome it almost hurt to look at him. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice betrayed the lie. "You don't look fine," he said, stepping closer. "You've been distant." I let out a shaky laugh, taking a sip of my wine to steady myself. "What do you want me to say, Ryan? That this is easy for me? That I don't feel like I'm losing my mind?" His brow furrowed, and he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. "Sophia?" "No," I said, pulling away. "You don't get to make this sound simple. It's not simple. It's messy and complicated and wrong and—" "It doesn't feel wrong," he interrupted, his voice firm. I stared at him, my chest tightening. "It should," I whispered. "But it doesn't," he said, stepping closer. "Not when I'm with you." The sincerity in his voice broke something inside me. I turned away, setting my glass down on the table beside me. "Ryan, whatever this is, it can't keep happening." "Why not?" he asked, his tone desperate. "Because I can't live like this," I said, my voice cracking. "I can't keep pretending that everything's fine, that I'm fine. I'm not." He was silent for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you regret it?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and unrelenting. I thought about it, about the nights we'd spent together, the way he made me feel, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered in the world. "No," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I don't regret it." He took a step closer, his hand reaching out to cup my face. "Then why are you trying so hard to push me away?" "Because it's going to destroy us," I said, tears stinging my eyes. Later that night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as David slept soundly beside me. I felt trapped, caught between the life I was supposed to have and the life I wanted. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the desire. I thought about Ryan, about the way he'd looked at me earlier, the way his voice had trembled when he asked if I regretted it. I didn't, and that terrified me more than anything else. The next day, I tried to distance myself from Ryan. I avoided being alone with him, threw myself into work, and spent as little time at home as possible. But it didn't matter how far I ran, he was always there, in the back of my mind, a constant, irresistible pull. It all came to a head one evening when David was working late again. I was in the living room, going over some paperwork, when Ryan walked in. "We need to talk," he said, his tone serious. I looked up at him, my chest tightening. "Ryan, I can't. You can't keep avoiding me," he said, cutting me off. "You think I don't see what you're doing? You're trying to run from this, from us, but it's not working." "I'm trying to protect us," I said, my voice rising. From what? He demanded. From feeling something real for once? From being happy? From ruining everything? I snapped, standing up. Ryan, this isn't a fairy tale. This is real life, and real life has consequences. And what about what I feel? He asked, his voice breaking. What about what you feel? Are you just going to ignore it, pretend it doesn't matter? I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. What do you want me to say, Ryan? That I want you? That I think about you every second of every day? That I can't stop? Yes, he said, his voice firm, because it's the truth. Tears filled my eyes and I shook my head. It doesn't matter. Wanting something doesn't make it right. But it doesn't make it wrong either, he said, stepping closer. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, charged with everything we couldn't say. Then, slowly, he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. Tell me you don't feel the same way, he whispered. Tell me, and I'll walk away. I couldn't. Instead, I let him pull me into his arms, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was equal parts desperate and tender. For a moment, the world fell away, and all that mattered was him. When it was over, we sat together on the couch, the silence between us filled with unspoken words. I don't know what to do, I admitted finally, my voice trembling. We'll figure it out, he said, his hand closing over mine. His confidence should have comforted me, but instead, it filled me with dread. Because deep down, I knew the truth. We were walking a dangerous line, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who could live with this level of deceit. Before Ryan, I'd always believed I was strong, disciplined, and unwavering in my commitments. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I realized that the person I thought I was, the version of me that David married, was someone I'd long since left behind. The worst part? I didn't feel like I'd lost myself. I felt like I'd found something I didn't know I was missing. A few nights after the conversation in the backyard, I stood at the bathroom sink, brushing my hair and staring at my reflection in the mirror. David was in the bedroom, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I looked at myself, trying to see the woman I used to be, the wife who loved her husband, the stepmother who never crossed a line. But all I could see was the way Ryan looked at me, the way he touched me, the way he made me feel like I was the center of the universe. The woman in the mirror wasn't conflicted. She wasn't filled with guilt or shame. She was selfish, and she knew it. It wasn't long before the cracks in my carefully constructed facade started to show. David began asking more questions. You've been distracted lately, he said one morning over breakfast. Work's been stressful, I replied, keeping my tone light. He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. The truth was, David wasn't stupid. He was a lawyer, after all, trained to notice inconsistencies, to pick apart stories and find the lies hidden in plain sight. And while he might not have known exactly what was going on, I could tell he sensed that something wasn't right. One evening, I was in my office, pretending to work on a project for a client. The house was quiet, David having gone to bed early after a long day. Ryan knocked softly on the door before stepping inside. You're up late, he said, closing the door behind him. I could say the same about you, I replied, my heart racing as he walked over to my desk. He leaned against the edge, his hands resting on the polished wood. I wanted to see you. Ryan, I started, but he cut me off. I don't want to play this game anymore, he said, his voice low and intense. I can't keep pretending like I don't want you every second of every day. His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I looked away, my hands trembling in my lap. You don't understand how complicated this is, I said softly. I do, he said, reaching out to lift my chin so I'd meet his gaze. But I don't care, I want you, Sophia, no matter what. I closed my eyes, my chest tightening. It's not that simple. It could be, he said, his voice steady, if you'd let it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with everything Ryan had said. I thought about what it would mean to leave David, to walk away from the life I'd built and start over. The idea terrified me, but the thought of losing Ryan terrified me even more. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. David had gone out to run errands, leaving Ryan and me alone in the house. I was in the kitchen, tidying up, when Ryan walked in. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the counter, watching me. What is it? I asked, turning to face him. I can't keep doing this, he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I mean I can't keep pretending that I'm okay with this, with hiding how I feel, he said, stepping closer. Ryan, we don't have a choice, I said, my voice trembling. Yes, we do, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. You just have to decide what you want. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. You're asking me to choose between you and my husband. I'm asking you to choose what makes you happy, he said. Because I can't keep living like this, wondering if every moment with you will be our last. Tears